Today's guest, one of the greatest alpine skiers of all time, Ken Reid, first North American to win a World Cup downhill, launching, of course, the Crazy Canucks, Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show. Coming up! Our guest today hails from Calgary. He is the first Canadian to win a men's World Cup downhill. He won 5 World Cup races, 14 World Cup podium finishes, 40 top 10 finishes, a key member of the Crazy Canucks, former president of Alpine Canada, broadcaster for CBC, a member of the Alberta Sports Hall of Fame, a member of the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, a member of Canada's Walk of Fame. He launched Breath of Life, the ski challenge. He is co-author of White Circus. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program, Ken Reid. Ken, great to have you here, my friend.
Joe, it's great to be with you. It's like old days because I used to come in when my days with CBC, and of course, we'd be doing stuff during the day, and then I'd settle in the hotel room at night and get to listen to you. So
Right on, buddy. Right
it
on.
was
Yeah, yeah. So that we go back a little ways. So, how did you become a ski racer? What got you into the sport?
well. I think the traditional path for most people is through family. I guess I had the good fortune that in I have 3 siblings. My oldest is a sister. So back probably in the 50s, 60s, women's hockey was not as present as
Uh
it
huh.
is today. Fortunately, unfortunately for her. So if the family wanted to stay together, we did lots of skiing. And my mother, though, was the instigator. She raced in her youth, Canadian champion 1948, and so she made sure that all of us were good skiers.
Yeah, you know what? I can relate to that. I remember, having the kids in hockey at younger ages, and one kid's playing hockey, the rest of them are running around the arena and they're not really paying attention, not really having a good time. But we go on a ski vacation and everybody has a good time and everybody's involved, and it's yeah, you're right, it's a really good family sport for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
like anything, you get involved in it, and then we. I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That my mom was a racer, so but she always said that to me and my younger brother Jim that our older siblings Janet and Ron, they were the experiments, and we were the ones that benefited from the experience they got from them learning through joining the club, going through the race program, and getting the necessary miles. As always, like with everything, hockey, skiing, almost any sport, the more you can do it when you're young, to instill that love of it, it really pays off when you do get close to the top and you're challenging to be world's best.
What attracted you specifically to the downhill?
Uh, I'm a guy, and g guys young guys like challenges. Like, who's the one who's climbing the apple tree and then falls out? Who's the one who's doing antics out on the playground, on all the apparatus out there? So for me, skiing was something that, I don't remember learning to ski. To me, it was just something I always did, and I always loved to push the envelope. When I was young, actually, we lived for a period of time in Kingston, Ontario. My father was at Queen's University, and we skied at Camp Fortune up near Ottawa. And they had the ski jumps there, and they had to pry me off the ski jumps. So, and I felt that probably had a big part of liking to throw yourself as far as you could go off ski jumps. Um, and then as we moved west in 1968. My dad took a position with the University of Calgary Med School, and the mountains were nearby, and away we went. And that was a very timely move because having exposure to the bigger hills and widening your horizons is certainly an important thing to do at the right point in time in your life.
You mentioned your mom was Canadian champion. Who was it that inspired you to believe that you could be ultimately on top of the world?
Well, I'd say my parents are always they're a big part of it because they always instilled a sense of no barriers. You could do whatever you want. My mother was a groundbreaker actually in skiing, not only while as a competitor, but then also she became one of the first female international technical delegates who oversee running of races. So she was and she was on the board of then Alpine Canada. And so she always she you know, for her it was just something you always did, and so there were no barriers, there were no gender barriers to her. She just said, hey, you want somebody who can do the job, I'm going to do the job. um, but I think when it comes into coaching, because ultimately absolutely have to have good coaching, and that's what I would encourage anybody to. That's the first and foremost thing you should be looking for is good guidance, good leadership, something that's going to instill a passion in your youth and in your kids. And I had the good fortune both having good coaches in the Ottawa area. Ted Graves, who's had a couple of kids who went on to the national team, and Doug Livingston, who just was a keen parent. And then on into in the West with a gentleman by the name of Mike Weegley. Mike is best known for establishing being one of the founders of the heli ski industry in the West. But Mike at the time was key in building up the Lake Louise Ski Club, and he at one point in time the Lake Louise Ski Club had more members of the national team than any club in the country. And he just instilled in all of us the sense of possibility, because he said to me in later in life that here he was with a club with a whole bunch of really young kids and a lot of parents, and no examples, no champions. That he said, normally in Austria you'd have a club that would have maybe an Olympic champion, a world champion, a World Cup winner. They had nothing. All he had was energy and enthusiasm, and he said, but it was his secret weapon.
Yeah, it worked, and you guys took it from
It
there.
worked.
Right. So tell me about making the national team and getting started with Team Canada.
Well, it's again good fortune of running into right coaches at the right time, and ultimately we Canada has been successful in ski racing when we built a cohort. Cohort meaning a bunch of like-minded kids who have talent, have drive, have energy, enthusiasm, and can support each other. And so in at the time, Jim Hunter was the top Canadian male skier. Dave Irwin and Dave Murray had just joined him on the World Cup tour. And then I was in a camp where they were selecting a new national team. And what was interesting about it was there was a program at the time which was called um, uh, for the 1976 Summer Olympics, but called Game Plan 76. And so
Mhm.
the Alpine there was a similar program for winter as for summer, and the Canadian team was able to establish a new development team. We were selected that year, 1974, and in that group where was a young Torontonian by the name of Steve Podborski. And so
Uh-huh.
from that point in time on, Steve and I were teammates. We quickly progressed to the World Cup the next year, and then kind of the rest is history. But it was that tight cohort that stuck together. Jim exited a little bit early, but Dave, Steve, and I, and then Todd joined us in the latter years. We're that competitive group that were pushing each other, supporting each other, sharing information, but all with an attitude of saying, because the mindset of the time was we had very successful women, but not very successful men.
Mhm.
We had never had a male on the podium in World Cup, World Championship, or Olympic competition. And we had the mindset of saying, why not? You know, the women can do it, we can do it too. And within actually within a year, Steve and I were on the podium.
Yeah, let's talk about that first win, that breakthrough in December 1975. Val d'Isere set up the
Prima
race for
edizione
us.
della Coppa
Did you
del
have an
Mondo.
inkling that this could
La
happen?
discesa libera è stata vinta sorprendentemente.
Well, I did. I'd actually joked a couple of weeks before at a training camp with Scotty Henderson, our coach, saying, wouldn't it be funny that the first time I'm skiing in the first seed, I get number one and I win the race, and everybody kind of went ha 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 ha. And so night before the race, he walked in and said, "Hey, you got the number you wanted." I'm pointing through number one out on my bed, and I said, "Well, no, 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 no. I actually didn't want number one because number one is the track does speed up very slightly,
Uh-huh.
but in retrospect, it turned out well. That year, Val-d'Isère was a low snow year. The track was very, very rough and bumpy. You could see it in the video there that our skis were rattling around, which they did a lot back in those days because the course preparation was quite different than what it is today. But I didn't have any preconceptions. Training had gone well. We had good training in that fall up in Zermatt. We managed to through the week of because you have 3 days of training runs to familiarize yourself with the track, and that had gone well, but nothing that had indicated that there was going to be a win. Um, and then I just know in pushing out of the start gates and the run that I had. Now, when you're racing down a track, you're not analyzing as you go. You're just doing.
Right.
You've trained yourself to just react and go. But I had the sense of the line was flowing really well. And I know one of my competitors, Werner Griezmann from Austria, said afterwards, I saw his track and I just knew that this is going to be tough to try to beat him. So, but what this shows here, this section is that's the compression right there, and you can see I really launched. As it turned out, that was a very pivotal jump because it was really tricky. And even though it didn't, it looked like, okay, that was no big deal. You went up in the air and you kind of had your ski slide out. You should have seen everybody else. They were launched,
Right.
and people were all over the place, and that was the difference. Now, Franz Klammer was the downhiller to beat at that time. He'd won every downhill the year before, and so we were waiting. I was number one. Franz was number 14. And I couldn't believe that Dave came down and he was sitting right second behind me. Bernard Russi, who was the defending Olympic champion, he came down and he was just behind me. And then so we're all waiting for Franz. And as he came into that
Uh-huh.
final stretch, he actually caught an edge and crashed. And
Oh.
my reaction was I stuck my hands up in the air and then immediately pulled them down because I'm going,
Yeah.
I knew I'd won the race, but I'm going, but is he okay? and
Yeah, yeah.
which he was, fortunately. But and everyone then went back and carefully analyzed whether or not I was actually going to beat him or not. In fact, I was going to beat him, and because he had been behind me the whole way down,
Right.
and it would have been close. But and then from there, because the story, of course, doesn't stop there. In that race, I was first, Dave was fourth, Steve was ninth, Jim was 10th, Dave Murray was 13th, and everybody was going, "Where did these guys come from?" Because we'd never had a Canadian on the podium. And then 2 races later, in a place called Schladming, Austria, Dave Irwin clocked everybody, and that's when everybody went, "Okay, these guys are for real."
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So I mean, here you are. You've just become the first Canadian to win a men's World Cup downhill. Your head must have been spinning. I mean, your fractions were, as you mentioned, better than Franz Klammer. I mean, this is good. This is good.
Well, it was it was one of these things where I think in this day and age, people would the team would probably immediately put with you a team advisor, psychologist, someone to say, okay, just keep carrying on doing what you're doing because this is good. But I know that I had a bit of a internal crisis because I'm sitting there going, well, I just accomplished something that I've been dreaming about doing. And so what do I do now? And it took me about 2 or 3 weeks to go, well, you dummy, do it again. Uh, and so we were on a roll, but it took 2.5 years for me to win another race. And through that, there was a lot of learning. Um, we were Canadians were outsiders. We didn't have all the top equipment. We didn't have the necessarily the tight inside knowledge. We didn't have access to the good training slopes. We were, there were a bunch of barriers that we had to work through, gaining confidence with the ski industry. So first of all, that we weren't just
Hmm.
flashes in the pan, that we were worthwhile investing in. The organization had to grow and mature, so there were a lot of organizational mistakes made in terms of training camps and and team preparation and so on. But as we chipped through all of those, and I think they were a necessary learning curve for both organizationally and individually. Um, that became then the rock solid foundation. That when we did come around and win our next race, it was actually I won and Dave Murray was right behind me in second place. And almost every race after that, we almost had two Canadians on the podium every time we had podium success. And that to me was showing the strength of the organization and the team. The team was a tight unit. We pushed each other hard. We worked together. It was innovative things like which are taken for granted now that you'd get to the bottom and you'd immediately get on the radio and pass information up to the top. People thought that that was odd that here you are, passing on information to a competitor who might beat you. But it was always a case of saying, well, that's this circumstance. The next time around, it could be the roles could be reversed. But I think the real reason why you do it is because you know that ski racing is unique in that you're trying to beat the mountain, not your competitors.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so everybody's trying to figure out what's the best way down. And so that sort of offset of not having to actually get, I have to beat you, Steve, to be able to get to the next match. No, I have to try to beat the mountain. And in sharing that information, what you're doing in training and in competition is only serving to strengthen your team and give you a better chance to be successful.
Yeah, you're all working together to beat the mountain as opposed to trying to beat each other.
Yep.
So a couple of years later, you got the victory in France. You mentioned then January 12th, 1980, you finally conquered Kitzbühel, one of the most difficult and prestigious races in the world. You hadn't had a lot of success there prior to this. What was the difference this time around?
Well, it was one of these. Kitzbühel is one of these tracks where you come in, and again, I mentioned before that there was always these little barriers that you had that whether you felt you had the best skis or the best gear and so on, or the best information. But with Kitzbühel, you always said, you know what, this is a downhill where none of that matters. This is a downhiller's downhill. This is a tough track. It's not going to be a case of somebody didn't get the wax right, it didn't choose the right ski. It's going to be who skis the best and who can push it right, push the envelope out as close to 100% as possible. And so you'd arrive at Kitzbühel, and it is the Super Bowl of ski racing.
Hmm.
And it hadn't quite clicked for us, and that was all of us. We'd done okay, ninth, 10th, eighth, but we knew we could do better. So we often trained nearby in a place on a glacier, a town called Hintertux, which is a couple of valleys over in Austria. And on a weather out, day where we were weathered out from training on the glacier, Steve and we looked at each other and said, "Well, let's go hike the downhill and down in Kitzbühel." So it was an hour drive away. Um, jumped in a car, drove down, hiked up, and there is a trail, and they have signs that mark all the different sections. And Kitzbühel takes their downhill very, very seriously.
Uh-huh.
Um, so and I had this sense after hiking up and coming back down that I just had a more intimate bond with the hill. Now, what those were little things like as when you walk up a hill, sections that you feel when you're skiing down, you go, "Oh, this is a flat section," but when you're walking up, you realize, "Okay, this isn't actually very flat. This has actually got a good pitch to it." And you realize you get a better sense of the biases of the hill, how steep, how flat it is. You get a better sense of place. And another example was there's um, a a house that's just to the side. It's called the Sidle, which is about a third of the way up. And that's it's best known as Hansi Hinterseer's home. Hansi was one of the top Austrian racers of the day, a technical skier, but and classic story of he skied to school and then would hike back
Uh-huh.
up. And, so classic of why there's Austrian skiers can be great. And but it's also known as the birthplace of the World Cup, where five of the sport leaders had gotten together saying we need to form a World Cup. And so it's and in hiking up, it was sort of going, oh, okay, that's where it is. And
Uh-huh.
so you got all this better sense of place and time. And then other little things that so one wonders, okay, why is it called the Hahnenkamm? Hahnenkamm is the rooster comb on that the red rooster
Mm.
comb, and it's called that because the rocks at the top of the mountain are red, the red cliffs, and which you don't necessarily see when they're covered with snow, but when there's no snow on them, you just go, okay, I can see why there would have been some Austrian farmer 100 years ago going, oh, it looks like, it's a Hahnenkamm up there. Um,
Right.
but all of those, just that nuance and sense of it. Um, and then we had another day where we're weathered out a couple of weeks later, and we brought another, Steve and I decided to do it again. And we had a bigger group, some of the younger athletes on the team, but one which included was Todd Brooker. And same thing,
Uh-huh.
but in that case, now we're going, okay, this is where it is. And we were kind of describing it all. But I distinctly remember when we showed up for the race that year, and the season actually, the early weeks of 79, 80 had not gone that well for us. A couple of crashes, some not great races. So we were waiting for things to get going. And I remember going down for the first inspection on Wednesday saying, okay, I have a much better sense of this hill. And but the absolute key was the Stahlhang is one of the tricky parts of the course. And the video you showed there shows the very first, that's the carousel turn and then coming into the Stahlhang. Stahlhang being steep wall where
Hmm.
and I was having a little bit of trouble in training and nailing it. And it's critical because there's a long flat after it that you don't actually see on TV. And if you don't come out with a lot of speed, so this is just come off the mouse folly or the mouse trap. This section showing here that's the carousel. And then you need to come across and right here dive, and that's the Steilhang. And then this is a convex turn where then as you come out, you need to carry the speed. And then this picks it up on the lower part of the course. Um, so what happened is on last inspection, I came down and our downhill coach Heinz Koppler was standing there. And he said, "Okay, come on down. You describe what you see when you're coming down, and then we're going to go back up, and then I'm going to tell you, help you do little final fine tune adjustments." So did that. Walked him through it, climb back up. Not talking about a long distance here, just hiking back up maybe 10 meters. And they said, okay, what I want you to do is you got the line coming in. When you come to this roll and you dive in, I want you to dive, look for the fence, and go. You start your turn right away. And that was just for him giving me a mental cue of what to look for because I've been starting the the exit turn just a split second late. And
Mm.
in the race, I did exactly what he said. Came in, dove, looked for the fence, and started. And as I exited, I went, bingo. Because I could
Uh-huh.
just feel that I was high, I was carrying the speed I wanted. And then you've trained yourself not to reflect on stuff. It was a sensation. It was, when I say bingo, that was what was coming to me in the finish line afterwards. But I knew the sensation was I'm carrying the speed I need. And then for the rest of it was just making sure I executed exactly the plan that I've been doing all week. And crossing the finish line, I knew that I'd established a good enough lead. There were still a couple of scares. One of them coming from Dave Irwin, who ended up fourth in the race, and from another young Austrian named Hardy Weirather, who went on to
Mm.
become world champion a couple of years later. So, but still, um, at that point, it was finally a realization of saying, yeah, we've done it. We've won on the toughest downhill in the world, and one of the interesting things about our sport is we have this split personality because we, of course, skiing has Olympic and World Championships, and then we have our World Cup. But there are these classic traditional locations like Kitzbuhel, Lake Wengen, and so when you ask an athlete, a downhiller in particular, would you rather win an Olympic medal or would you rather win the Hahnenkamm? And a lot of people are very shocked when a lot of them say, well, I'd rather win the Hahnenkamm because the Hahnenkamm is the tough. It's just the world championship of every year. and it is without dispute, the toughest challenge. So each has a different nuance. Of course, you want to try to win both or win all of it, but winning the Hahnenkamm, winning the Lauberhorn are they're special places. And the good thing is that the folks at Kitzbuhel, as a result of it, invite you back every single year.
Well, and you know what? You conquered both of them within 6 days. 6 days later, you make it back-to-back wins at Wengen, the Lauberhorn. Different type of course, as you mentioned. Longer, more turns. Longest running downhill event in the world. Some 30,000 fans on hand for this event every year. I understand it gets pretty grueling. Tell us about that.
Well, you can see the finish time there is 2:31, so it's almost 30 seconds longer than any other track. And it's a much more subtle downhill than certainly Kitzbühel or Val Gardena and so on. And so you have to nuance is much more important with Wengen. Um, Now the calendar always puts the Lauberhorn at Wengen in front of the Hahnenkamm, because it's actually, if you do the reverse, if the Lauberhorn is after the Hahnenkamm, the reaction of the athletes is, well, that's pretty easy, um, because it's not a an on the edge downhill. It's very subtle. You have to be able to glide. You have these tight little tough tricky sections, and then really let your skis run. And part of this is in having the double success is momentum. Um,
Mm.
like in almost any sport, is that when you have the confidence brimming and you know you're competing well, then that's half the battle's already won. And then mental game plays an extremely important role. If you have the confidence, then you probably have 90% of the battle won. You just have to execute well. And that week we had brilliant weather, great snow. For me, it was actually a double downhill. So on the Friday was the race that I won, and everything just went flawlessly for me. But the trick, the one thing was, I it wasn't I was skiing the upper 90% of the course technically well, but as it came into the last section, the last interval, I was actually a half a second behind. And uh, in that last roughly 20 seconds of the course, because and but that was the way I skied it, that I knew I had the line absolutely nailed. And when you watch the video, and this is the section here, that turn we're seeing right now is the difference, that I absolutely nailed that turn and gained nearly 7/10 of a second. And Carl Arab, who was a very famous Swiss commentator, he was calling this race, and he came in to me afterwards in the finish area, and he said, "That was unbelievable. You were a half a second behind, and you literally gained almost a second on everybody in the last 20 seconds of the course. You just skied it totally different than everybody else." And that again came back to the confidence and what you knew is your best skill set. I was not the best glider on the tour, which most of the rest of the track was very oriented to gliding, letting the skis run. But technically, and especially in that type of a turn, I knew that I was maybe the best in the world, and I put it to good use. The second day, almost the same thing, but I had made a little error up on the upper part, and Peter Mueller, who was my main competitor in that year, he nipped me by 300ths of a second. So when you think after 2.5 minutes, you get bumped by three hundredths of a second, that's pretty much a dead tie. But um, you know that it's in Switzerland, and of course the Swiss were delighted that a Swiss won the race.
That's all Swiss timing, man. That's all Swiss timing. They started the clock a little late on Peter. I know that. So, so you had no question in my mind at that particular time. You were the best downhiller on the planet. That must have felt pretty good.
Well, it's what you dream for, it's what you work towards, and um, uh, especially, I think, I've often reflected on this, because what's interesting between our group, the Crazy Canucks, and then subsequent generations of top skiers, because they come in waves. We have had had middle success that came about 5 or 6 years after our group retired, with Rob Boyd, Felix Belchik and crew, and then Eddie Podovinsky, Kerry Mullen, then Eric Gay, Manny Osborne Parody, and now the current group with Jack Crawford, Cam Alexander, and my son Jeff. Um, uh, but there's enormous contrast between our group and every subsequent group, and that contrast is that we had lots of World Cup success, and they've had much more World Championship and Olympic success, and not as much success on the World Cup tour. So Steve is still has won more World Cups than any Canadian male, and I stand second still. But we
Right.
haven't had as many podiums as others. Steve still, well, Eric Gaze has the most podiums, but interestingly enough, doesn't have as many wins. Um, but he has 2 World Championship medals, and and Jack Crawford has got an Olympic and World Championship medal. So examples, those are the real interesting contrasts. And I've wondered why that is. My reflection on it is that in our era, the World Cup was relatively new, but it had gained a lot of stature, and it was seen by everyone as that was the most competitive part of the tour. The Olympics actually had a different place in
Mm.
everyone's mind back up until, say, the 1990s, when it now has become kind of the overriding goal, and especially now when you have programs geared to winning medals at the Olympics. Um, so the priority of the programs has shifted, and you can see that where weeks, as I mentioned earlier, Steve and I came in with best ever 76. Okay, that was the first program Canada had focusing on the Olympics. That was a
Mhm.
modest program, but then was 88 was best ever 88, and then Vancouver 2010 was on the podium 2010. um, the focus has shifted more to performing at world championships as the benchmark and the Olympics, whereas they all are going out to try to do as well as they can for the World Cup. But I have this feeling that there's a little bit different priority. We were, and I would also say that now the resources that are available make it bring greater, sharper focus for all the athletes. Whereas we were still learning, feeling our way. We were still learning, and as a result, we had more success outside in World Cup and not in Olympic and World Championship competition.
Mhm. Yeah, different focus, different time, and
Different age.
yeah, you guys did all right. You guys did all right. So now of course you did have your spills, and the big one, of course, being the one that at the famed course Garmisch-Partenkirchen. So in a sport where you reach speeds of 150 kilometers an hour with no real protection, I imagine there could be problems. And in this particular case, January 10th, 1981, a year after those back-to-back wins, and just 75 meters from the finish, and one of the worst face plants I guess you're ever going to see, right?
Yeah, yeah. You're making me see this again. So that's okay. That's okay. No, it was soft snow, lots of snow that year. Actually, lots of injuries. So there's a interesting parallel to that year and what's happening currently on the World Cup, because there's been a lot of injuries on the World Cup this year. Um, but the soft snow, what happened in that particular turn was, as I came into that final turn, I leaned in to, which is just a little
Mhm.
trick to let use your momentum to go around, and unfortunately my ski tracked out, and that's why the skis, you can see the skis just literally go out from underneath me, and bang, I'm down. And falling on a flatter section is really the worst place of all to fall. So unfortunately, resulted in uh, broken nose, and I did some fairly significant damage to my knee. Fortunately, not as bad as what was felt. I did end up with an ACL tear, ACL rupture and an MCL tear, and a little bit of damage to meniscus. But that's the good thing in that as I learned, and I already knew from Steve, because Steve had a knee injury at the end of the season. Well, in Kitzbuhel actually, 2 years before, um,
Mhm.
and or no, oh, 4 years before. So I knew from him that you could come back from that, so that was always good, and I did. But uh, I can reflect back today that my knees are solid. I've done the same injury in my other knee, just free skiing. But fortunately, there's no lasting damage, knock on wood, that that limits my skiing or causes any arthritis, especially that. Thankfully.
Okay, so here's an interview you did at the time. Let's roll that.
I've had a couple of days of pain after the surgery, which is to be expected. Monday night and Tuesday were pretty uncomfortable. Wednesday wasn't too bad. Today I'm not feeling too bad.
Tell us about the fall. We've seen how it happened, but in your explanation, what happened?
Well, the first thing was that the conditions were very, very fast that day, and the snow was soft and very catchy. And you could see that in the way people were coming down the hill, that there were people catching edges a lot. I came down into the last turn, which was a very gradual left-hand turn to the finish, and I know I was a little tight on the turn. And I came around, and I have a technique that I just sort of lean into the hill and arc around the turn, and I guess I leaned in, but you're supposed to keep your weight on the downhill ski. I guess I had the weight a little bit on the uphill ski, and what happened then was that the soft snow caught my uphill edge, knocked my feet out from underneath me, and I was down before I could even react.
Yeah, I apologize showing this to you again and again and again. It's hard to watch. Anyway, worse
But
in
here I
slow
am,
mo, of course. Yeah. So, but
40
still,
years later. Yeah,
yeah,
40 years
yeah.
later, still same explanation. I leaned in.
I just
Don't
the
lean
shivers.
in.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Okay, you mentioned already earlier that your dad was a professor of medicine at the University of Calgary, and interestingly enough, he was even there at the time to to analyze your medical report. And kind of a cool moment here, but it must have been tough for your parents, even though he was having good fun with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's they were, of course, my parents, and I think that's probably pretty common for many successful athletes, that parents are supportive. They, I've certainly adopted their view, as has my wife Linda. That and we've met on the national team, and so she skied on the World Cup as well. So we've certainly brought that experience but to bear. But where my parents, and I know Linda's parents, were exactly the same way, supportive, always there. When you could come home and you need someone to pick you up at the airport, they're there, drop you off, being supporting you what you're doing. Maybe occasionally a little bit of a conscience. I remember my dad would often say, "Weren't you planning to go for a run today?" You know, little things that,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, right, okay, yeah. Better suit up and go out and do what I plan to do. Stop procrastinating." But never getting in the way. Being supportive. And so when I crashed, at the time, I lived in Calgary, and actually was no place to have a knee repair in Calgary at that point in time. And fortunately, the physician that was with us in Garmisch had suggested that I go to Vancouver, and with Dr. Pat McConkey for repair. And there were a number of leading orthopedic surgeons. London was the main center. They just simply
Mhm.
said, it's probably more sensible for you to go to Vancouver than to be in London, because it's just going to be that much further to travel, and you're going to get the same support. And my parents were on the plane. They actually met me when I came off in Vancouver International from Europe, and then my dad stayed with me the whole week, because this day and age, you're in, you get your repair, and you're out same day. Then I stayed in the hospital for a week, and was there being supportive, and that was just what that's what parents do. I've seen many parents, current athletes, that have had their kids get injured, even this year, where they've been there, they've traveled enormous distances, and they're there with their kids to make sure that they get the proper care and they get safely home. And and as a parent, you realize that's important, and what's the payoff for the kids is it's tremendous support as they go through their career success and where they have to deal with challenges. But most important is I think that instills in them a sense that they're going to carry it on to their children as well.
So, okay, the Crazy Canucks. Who came up with that name? How did you guys get the moniker?
Well, there's various stories as to how it came about, but I think we've all settled on rather than quibbling about it that it's Serge Lang, he's considered he's a Swiss journalist, French Swiss journalist, and he was the founder of the World Cup, and the World Cup was his baby. He wanted to make sure that this was the most important ski competition, and so Serge, uh, in, watching us ski, um, just there were various names, kamikaze Canadians, and so on and so forth. But eventually, it settled into, you guys are crazy, crazy Canucks. You take risks. Initially, it was seen as a little bit of an explanation as that we were taking extra risks. And we would counter that by saying, well, we're just doing what Franz Klammer does. And but they're going, well, Franz Klammer's an Austrian. You're not. But eventually, as success took hold, it then just became a brand. Um, Certainly in Europe, because I know since then, certainly the group in the 2000s had the Canadian Cowboys moniker.
Mm.
But whenever a Canadian does well in Europe, male or female, in alpine skiing, there's always a reference to the Crazy Canucks are back, and
Uh,
so that's just it's like the Habs, it's like the Leafs, it's just what Canadians are referred to now, which is fine. It's not it's a bravado that yeah, but it also comes with now it's seen as a badge of honor. um, and hand in hand with that is that we had another little what we viewed as a bit of a secret weapon. There's tremendous rivalry on the circuit in Europe, especially between the Austrians and Swiss, but the French and the Germans and the Italians and it's gotten wider, the Norwegians, the Americans, and so on. But we constantly had people coming and saying, if we're in Wengen, and they'd be going, well, we hope the Swiss win, but if not, we want you to win because that'll prevent the Austrians from winning. And you'd go to Kitzbuhel, and you'd get the same story. Hey, we want our team to win, but if they're not going to win, we hope you win so that you prevent the Swiss. And you go to Garmisch, you get the same thing. You go to Val Gardena, get the same thing. And so we always knew that we were always everybody's second favorite.
yeah, second favorite wherever we went. That's kind of fun. So, but you were very successful. I mean, oh my God, there's one event I think where Canadians took 5 of the top 7 spots in a World Cup event. That's not too shabby.
It was on that was the team high point. The story behind that was we had a close relationship with the French team, and the French at that period of time was having they didn't have the strongest downhill team, but they had access to good training venues, and so we had we had alliance with both the Norwegians and the French, so we were training with them quite a bit. And in the lead up to that particular year, that was 1981, I guess no, sorry, it was December 1980. Um, the We had been able to train on the Val d'Isere track for the entire run for a week, and it was
Mm.
absolutely spectacular training. Like, we could not have asked for better. Where you have a full 2-minute 5 downhill track, up and down, getting 4 and 5 runs per day. Now that's in contrast to in that era we would get maximum of 2 training runs, and then you have your race. So 3 days of training. So you maybe got 5 or 6 training runs and then the race. And we were getting that much per day for a week. And so going into the race, we had tremendous confidence. We knew exactly how to run the track, And the net result was we did get scooped by an Austrian skier by the name of Uli Spiess, who was actually he was the hottest skier of that moment until the next week when he had an incident and crashed. Um,
Yeah.
but I was second, Steve was third. Chris Kent, who was a youngster, was fourth. I think maybe Dave was fifth, and the other Dave was seventh. And
Wow.
so it was a consequence of just that tremendous amount of training that we'd had. Unfortunately for Chris, I remember we went to the next spot, which was Val Gardena, and his comment, because all of a sudden he'd gone from a track that he was a rookie on the tour, and suddenly he's on a track that he didn't know, and suddenly he's back in the 40s and 50s, and he's sort of going, "What happened? Did I forget how to ski in a week?" Uh, and then unfortunately he had a crash in training, and that set him back. So, but it was an interesting contrast of how we knew he could have been right at the front because he'd been in with us in training.
Right.
He'd had that experience on the track, and then when he went to one where he was the same as everybody else, all of a sudden that lack of experience really showed.
So the guys, Dave Murray passed away with cancer in 1990. Named a course after him that was used for the 2010 Olympics. Uh, Dave Irwin also crashed during a training run in 2001. A bad crash. How's Dave doing today?
Well, Dave is it's a bit tough. He is in a facility now under close care. He's managed his situation very, very well, and his partner Lynn Harrison, tremendous support, community support. He was living here in Canmore, and I see him quite frequently. Where he'd go down to the coffee shop, and he'd always be surrounded by friends, people that would direct him where to go. And he had a really good manner about how he explained the fact that he had a brain injury because he'd come up and he was just very matter of fact about it. Usually
Mhm.
within 30 seconds of a conversation, he'd say, "Well, I can't really remember that because I have brain injury." So, and it was good because it would disarm you because you could tell right away there was something not quite right. And as soon as he would be forward about it, he'd state that, and then you'd carry on. And I know watching him over periods of time, I I knew that initially when he was back and healthy and back in society that he there was little subtle things where he wouldn't really remember my wife's name or my kids, but then it seemed to be improving and getting better. Where he would then ask, how are the kids doing and so on. But there was no question in talking to him that there was a big gap. That most of our conversations are always about things that happened 30, 40, and 50 years ago. And hard to say 50 years ago, but
Yeah.
and then more recently, and I'm not intimately familiar with the details, but I know he's now in a facility to make sure that he's well taken care of. And he does periodically reach out. He has a cell phone, and he sort of has a routine. I was skiing with a cousin just a couple of weeks ago, and conversation was, does yeah, have you had any calls from Dave lately? And he said, well, yeah, every now and then. I call him too, so it's keeping in touch with him, but a bit unfortunate because we know a piece of our mutual history has disappeared.
Hmm. Well, you guys left the game in great shape. As you mentioned, Todd Brooker came along. It was become part of the crazy Canucks. Really, the Stemmels, Manny Osborne Parody, Eric Gay. Uh, the legacy was there. Do you feel like you've left Canadian skiing in a good place?
Uh, I felt we left it in a good place. Number one, and probably the most enduring piece, which will never go away, is the fact that, as I said a while back, when we came in, um, no one had ever been on a podium. There was no expectation of success. We were trying our best, but I've often said this, that when I left to Europe, one of the last comments my mom said to me was, "Have fun, enjoy yourself, don't have too high expectations." And it was kind of a, "Mom, come on." But it was the context of where we were at, and we changed that completely. Um, I've come to just actually recently realized actually I'm the first male to win a World Cup, period, in Canada, because
Mhm.
we hadn't won World Cups in ski jumping, cross country, freestyle, and snowboard hadn't come into the picture as yet. Male men in international competition, Canadian men, other than hockey, had very limited success, and we changed that completely. Where we now make it where it is fully within the expectation of any athlete who straps on a pair of skis that they can win a race. There's no barriers.
Before you guys came along, that was not the case. That was not the case. So, how was it difficult to transition from athlete to official?
Um, I'm going to use my dad's comment about it. He often was very critical of retiring athletes because either they didn't move on or they had challenges until he experienced retirement at 65, and in that era it was mandatory, no choice. 65, boom, you're retired. Um, Fortunately, it's not that way today. And after that, he confided in me saying, "I have a much, much, much deeper respect for the challenge that people face in retirement from sport, because here I've been grappling with it, and I'm 65. I've had a lifetime, and here you stick this on a 20 or 30 or now 40-year-old, and in the prime of their life, and suddenly they're making this change. So I understand much better. It is tough because you pour so much energy into it. To become successful in high performance sport, any Canadian athlete will know that it takes a single minded dedication and an entirely group that is supporting you. Um, but along the way, I think those that are wise in terms of thinking long term, you do have many opportunities, whether you're an NCAA athlete or a youth sports athlete in Canada, or you gain experiences. So whether there's an industry in your sport and you build good contacts, or you keep your finger on the education pulse wherever that you might be doing that, that you can
Mhm.
build further opportunities. My tactic when I decided it was time to hang up the skis and retire, was to get as busy as possible. I had a degree to finish, so I jumped straight into it at the University of Western Ontario, now Western, and just fully immersed myself. The hardest part actually was CBC came and asked me to be their color analyst, and so that meant every weekend it was back in my face, but because of the
Uh-huh.
busyness of the rest of it. But what it did do was I did have second thoughts through that first year of retirement, where that was the 1984 season, where I actually at the end of the year seriously gave consideration of making a comeback. Um, but I'm glad I didn't, because I think it was the decision had been made. I'd moved on. I'd established a new life, and then that really was the end of it. Was saying no, no, I am. I've got new directions. I've got new platforms. I want to try to be as valuable as possible in broadcasting. I'm starting a new business, which then went on to uh, on the social side of supporting the Breath of Life Challenge for cystic fibrosis, a number of different
Mhm.
ski area consulting contracts and this and that, and so and that led into tremendous experiences until the early 2000s, when I then was named CEO and president of Alpine Canada, and then a decade in sport administration, and then retirement.
Did you enjoy that part of it, running Alpine
Um,
Canada?
it was I won't sugarcoat it. It was a tremendous experience. Uh, I my belief in everything that I do is I want to see it left better than what I found it. In the case of Alpine Canada, that was actually um, pretty easy because it was bankrupt, and
Mm.
when I took it over, it was on the edge. Um, but through our chairman, our vice chairman, Rendo Beauchene and John Reed were tremendous to work with. Our team of staff that we built were hard workers, dedicated, and so between 2002 to 2008, I actually now say that my proudest accomplishment in sport was what we did in 2006, 7, and 2007, 8, which are the two most successful years of the Canadian Alpine ski team. And and my role was of helping lead the team that supported the athletes and the coaches to be the most successful. They surpassed our team at 15 podiums. We had 25 fourths and fifths. Um, so 40 top fives, if you want, and Canada has never achieved that level. And most important, when I left in 2008, they had $1 million in the bank.
Wow. From
So
bankruptcy to $1 million. That's all right.
yeah,
Well done.
so
Yeah. So
and
you
since
lots.
then, so
Yeah.
it's and then from there, the more recent, which is it's a team. So what I'm going to say now is something that I want to say it carefully, because the current group, of which I have the good fortune of having two boys on the ski team right now, um, but the men's speed group in particular, that's been a special project that we've navigated. Angus Crawford, Jack Crawford's father, and I have had hours and hours and hours of discussion. We've got a group of people that have been working to try to raise funds for special purposes on every single year. It's a very strong parent group. So cohorts aren't just the athletes; cohorts are the parents as well. And and
Mhm.
and then on top of that, the real linchpin, and so this is why I want to say it carefully, is the key person who is successful with it all is Johnny Kuchera, their coach. He has been with that
Mm.
group since they came together in 2015. And a couple of things. The athletic success is obvious. Jack Crawford, Olympic medalist, world champion. Cam Alexander, the one who's won a World Cup downhill so far, and bronze medalist
Mhm.
at the World Championships last year. Jeff now has hit the podium. Brody Seeger is at a fourth place, so he's almost hit the podium. And so that's the core, and there are others, but the real success is that of the group that has come together, which started coalescing 2015, 16, and you look through that 7 year, 8 year span, that only one athlete is not competing of the entire group that came into the speed side of the Canadian Alpine ski team, and that one athlete, Houston Phil, uh, he chose the NCAA pathway. He did compete for another 4 years, and he has a degree, but he's the only one. So he exited for a period of time from the Canadian ski team, but all the others are still racing. They're still competing, and I don't think
Wow.
there's another team in the world that can say that they've had kept together a cohort for that long, and that's a big reason why. And plus, along the way, Alpine Canada had to be supportive of this. So when it all came together, it was the leader of the day, the CEO of the day, who said, "Okay, we need a development team. If the parents can rally and raise, in that first year, it was 450,000 to make sure the program could go ahead, and it was for both men and women, and it was raised. It was going to the corporate sector, and there were a number of benevolent companies that stepped in, and a number of board members who assisted. And then from there, we're now at the tally so far to keep the group together. It's been $1.5 million. That is support. But if you look at it over, it's actually a 9 year span. That works out to about 175,000 per year, which sounds like a lot of money, but when you look at the ski team budget of 5 million plus per year, it's actually a very, very small sliver.
Mhm.
Some years bigger, some years zero, but always available to do little extra things. And one in particular that we like to use is, it was to hire the coaching staff came and said, we're short one coach. We need one that can kind of be the flex to fill in when when the teams, because you have a speed team and a tech team, and when they split, sometimes you have a couple athletes that are left with nothing to do, literally. So, and it actually, what happened was the Beijing Olympics in 2020. Cam, Alexander, and Jeff didn't make the team, and so that flex coach took them up to Norway to train the Hafjell, which is the site of the technical events of the '94 Olympics, and then ski in a Europa Cup in Kitzbuhel. And Cam won and was third, and Jeff was I think third or second. Had great success, and then the first race after the Beijing Olympics was a World Cup at Kitzbuhel, same track, and that's when Cam won his race, and Jeff had his best success with a sixth. And then they followed it up a couple of weeks ago with Cam on the podium and Jeff on the podium.
Right.
Those little extra pieces that drop in, and it's it's never, I mean, it's just an example of little details often can come back to so really rewarding results. And if you're always looking for those little extra pieces, you never know what might happen, whether it's $50,000 to fund a coaching position or $20,000 for an extra camp. But if you're always looking and building and trying to build the team and support the team, you will have good outcomes.
Right. Well, I mean, it just screams incredible development. I mean, the work is unbelievable. Like, only one skier didn't go that route, and everybody else is coming along extremely well. And I want to talk about the boys. I mean, you know, your wife was a competitive skier, Linda, and your sons Kevin, Erik, and Jeff followed in your footsteps. Erik chose the giant slalom as opposed to downhill. Did you talk him out of that, or his decision on that?
These things happen naturally, 'cause
Yeah,
I've had a lot of people saying, why did you become a downhiller? You say, well, you're in the top 10 in one event, and you're 60th in the other. Where do you think you're going to put your focus?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but
Well, there you go.
no, the
The
this
decision
is
is made
Jeff's
for you.
run.
This is Jeffrey's run,
Yeah,
yeah, from just a few weeks ago, Super G in Norway.
yeah,
Uh,
in Norway, and
First World Cup finish for his career. Tell us about your feelings here.
well, it was the interesting thing. He was skiing with number three, and it's Super G, and Super G you don't get training runs. And so it's your sense and your skiing skill of how you navigate the track. And so we're watching this, but we looked at the two skiers that were in front of him because he was number three, and one of them was River Radamus from the United States. And we know River because River's just a year younger than Jeff, and he's a racer that gives it, like he just full on goes. And that's a good sign because Jeff will probably get a course report from River's run from the coaches. And when he came back, he actually said, "Well, I was one better. I was actually watching his run because the number two was in the start gate and he was in the holding position, and the monitor was right there." And he says, "So I was able to watch his run and say, okay, yeah, I can really let it rip." And the trick is, and this turn right here we're looking at, that's the turn that Jack Crawford missed. Jack was three racers behind Jeff, and where Jeff knew that you could come in and just be relaxed, and he carried the speed through. That's where he moved himself right up to the front, and the rest of it, he's just developed a good sense of carrying speed and his confidence in his skill. And he's had a little bit of equipment issues this year, but that he just sorted out in the last couple of weeks. And the net result was that was why in Kitzbühel he was tracking to finish in the top three, running from number 52. And then in Kitzbühel, he had his best downhill result, and then the second place in the Super G. Um, what he's most proud of is he has been skiing behind Marco Odermatt his entire FIS career because Marco was the same age as him. They're both birth year 1997. And for the first time, he beat him 2 days running. So by
Wow.
hundredths, but one day it was 200ths, the next day it was 100th. But he said, "Doesn't matter. I beat him finally. I was the top 1997 birth year in the race." So, but um, but it's a testament, and especially with Cam he was then third in the downhill the day before, and he had his career best Super G. He was fifth in the Super G. and again a testament to confidence on the hill, where you have it wired, and I can relate to it because Val d'Isere was my track. I never finished it. I never finished out of the top 10 in Val d'Isere. It was a track that I had wired. I knew I would stand at the start gate, so I've got this. It's just a question. I have to have an error-free run, or I'll be on the podium. And they're in the same mindset that one little, that extra training has given them that extra bit of confidence. Um, but the best part of it all is that in the downhill the day before, there were four of them that were in the World Cup points. Jack, he was in the points on the Super G day. Brody is coming along. He's coming back from a knee injury at the World Championships last year. So next year he's going to really take off again. And it's again comes back to that team and determination. This year is actually until they finished it off in Kitzbuhel, and they still have the World Cup finals coming up this week. They've got that inherent confidence. A little bit of not as good a year this year until last week as it was the year before, but they've had the confidence. They have the belief. They just have to keep pounding away at it and work out the little wrinkles. And that's the sport. It's always changing. You got to be on top of stuff all the time. People don't realize how important the ski setup is. And when I talk about ski setup, that's the link between the skis, the bindings, the boots, and then the body. And they put extraordinary amount of time and efforts into it, because when you're coming down a hill at 140 kilometers an hour, you can't be questioning whether or not you're confident on your skis, and that things are not doing that you're not sure of. You have to be 100% wired into what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so they put hours and hours and hours into making sure that linkage. And that's a message to all young skiers. It's so important. That's your setup is where you need to focus your attention on, to making sure that the feel is correct. And when you have it, it's golden. And it's a tremendous feeling.
Yes, and that's the message from Ken Reed, the one who started it all. First North American to win a men's World Cup race. And uh, so I just want to ask you before we go, um, you can tell us because personally you've been there, you've observed the situation for the last 50 or so years, 40 to 50 years. And has there a difference in has climate change affected the sport of skiing?
Absolutely. Where we see it mostly is on the glaciers. Glaciers still form a pretty important part of what the sport does, because there's development on the various locations for summer training. Whether it's you go up to the glaciers in July. Before that, it's just you don't need to, because you have access to lower altitude resorts that just get tons and tons of snow, like down in Mount Hood or Bachelor, and same over in Europe. Um, but where there are sections of glaciers that I trained on in the 70s and 80s that don't have snow now. They don't have anything there. It's gone. The glaciers have receded. So the message I think that we share from our sport is that you've got many places. We unfortunately we don't have it in Canada, but everybody can go to Europe, and you can go to a place like, you can go to Zermatt, you can go to Saas-Fee, you can go to Hintertux, you can go up to Seoul in the glaciers, and you can go up and ski on them, and you can see firsthand what's happening. Now, skiers are using but a sliver of the glaciers, but it's really saying to people, come up and experience it while you still can, but see what is happening and why it is important that we change what we do, in terms of how the economy, various things. We need to. There's a long, difficult transition that's ahead of us, and we have to be creative and thoughtful, but we have to start on it, because in our sport, if the glaciers disappear, that's a problem. That's a big problem. So hopefully we will be able to, because what is happening is those places where they're air training now, they are trying to be responsible, and they're trying to manage the snow as best they can so that it doesn't disappear. Places like where there is the World Cup opening races in Seoul in Austria, half the track is covered by man-made snow. So there's lots of water available, but they're actually making snow rather than taking glacier snow and trying to then create a World Cup track, and that's responsible. But on top of that, there's other steps as well that we're doing, which that the World Cup and the International Ski Federation are doing, which is trying to minimize the carbon footprint. So when the tour travels around, because it is a World Cup, and so you are traveling to North America, to Scandinavia, occasionally over to Asia, and so on. That you make it that you're not just going for one-offs. So most recently. The men's tour came over to North America for 2 sets of races in Palisades and Aspen. And similar elsewhere when they go up to Scandinavia, that there's a multiple set of races. So the women were up in Lillehammer in Norway and Åre in Sweden, so that you're being more responsible, more efficient in terms of and that's better for the teams, of course, as well. So trying to keep in mind that those are part of our responsibility of being accountable to the public and accountable to the globe. Yes.
Right.
So, but the good thing about the industry at large is that, ironically, with snowmaking and a lot of the technology, that it actually we have longer seasons. More reliable seasons. The snowmaking technology now is such that it all happens automatically, and so in fact the Alpine material that they have that's developed in Italy, as soon as it drops to a certain temperature, it comes on automatically. It doesn't even have a manual need. And it'll blow snow, and then the snow is managed from there, and so you see much more reliable start to the year. So we've actually had record early openings in Western Canada, and the season goes well into May, and that hasn't changed. This year was a bit tough because we've had a super El Nino year, but in fact here we've had actually a really good ski season, and a little bit firm because it's a lot of man-made snow, but now the snow's coming back, and you manage it well. So, but all of this comes back to responsibility and making sure that that we're being sensible, managing our snow well, making sure that people, because we want this to be a sport that's available to all Canadians, for people around the world. And I think Canada is in a good position because people look at us as saying we got the best powder skiing in the world, number one, and number two, we've got very, very reliable ski resorts, and they're kind of beautiful as well.
Kind of nice. As an Alberta boy, I'll vouch for that. So, what's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've ever received. That's a tough one. Um, you should have told me to think about that for the past hour. So.
Yeah, but then you wouldn't be thinking about that, nothing else.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to say the best advice that I've received is and learned is as a parent, because so many of us are parents with kids in sport, is there are some that are very actively involved and coaches, and that's fine, and there are others that are very passive. But to me, number one is be there for your youngster, be there supporting them. Don't be totally passive. When I hear so many people say, well, it's their decision, my answer to that is, so is it their decision to go to school or not? No, there are certain things that you do need to have a certain amount of discipline, and recreation, no matter what it is one of them, because it's good lifestyle, health, lots of positives that go with that. And that, to me, is an important role of the parent, is to actually, provide that opportunity. So the discipline is such to say, hey, we're going to go skiing today. Everybody in the van. And if somebody in the family is going, well, no, I want to sit and watch cartoons, or play on my apparatus, you go, no, we're all going to go skiing. because that's what we're going to do as a family.
Yeah.
You can park that, and it's those little subtle bits of discipline that or that make an enormous difference for youth to instill a passion and a love and stuff in sport and recreation, and then understand the role of the coach. Be supportive of the coach. Don't get in the way of the coach. The coach has the intimate relationship with your athlete, and that's a sacred trust. So don't undermine it. Be supportive of it.
Mm.
Don't leave the athlete second guessing, saying, "Oh, do I listen to my dad or my mom, or do I listen to my coach?" No, make sure you support the coach. Talk to the coach. Always talk to the coach, but don't dictate to the coach. Understand what they're doing, but be supportive. Make suggestions, but make suggestions. Don't tell. Say, "Hey, if you thought of this, or what about that? What about a training camp here? Do you think that's a good idea?" Let them, often drop the seed. Let them think about it. Let them come back. If you built that bond of trust with them, they'll trust you, and often you can end up with a really good relationship that blossoms.
Awesome. Beautiful. Well said. Thank you, sir. Well, appreciate you taking the time to join us, Ken, and good luck with future endeavors, whatever they are, and good luck with the boys. That's so much fun. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and they're working hard, and they have a great team to work with, which is wonderful, and good coaching leadership, and so we're sitting back. We lots of early mornings, 1:30 in the morning, watching live streaming from Europe. It's very
Yeah.
blurry-eyed weekends.
But even if you're Ken freaking Reed, you still let the coach do his thing, right?
Absolutely. So
All right. Thanks for this, Ken.
thanks, Joe.
More sports when we come back.
Rely on Walton Restoration's 40-plus years of excellence in residential and commercial restoration. Their strong reputation is built on workmanship, professionalism, and outstanding customer service. Trust Walton as your dependable partner in emergencies, serving Durham, Kawartha, and Northumberland regions. Call 905-725-5666 or visit waltonrestoration.com. Experience top-tier workmanship and service. Walton Restoration, the trusted name in property restoration. Join satisfied customers like me. Addiction Rehab Toronto, Toronto's #1 alcohol and drug treatment center, saving lives, reuniting families. The only treatment center in the province to offer medical detox, treatment, sober living, and lifetime aftercare all in one place. Our unique and specialized programs are designed to equip our clients with the tools to successfully lead a life of dignity, respect, and purpose. Let us help save your life or your loved one's life. Call today for more information or to facilitate an intervention. 1-855-787-2424 or visit addictionrehabtoronto.ca.
When you're injured in an accident, you may be entitled to multiple benefits. Entitlement to these benefits are based on your insurance policy. On a basic policy, you will have eligibility for income replacement benefit, non-earner benefit, attendant care, and medical rehabilitation benefits. It is very important to have a detailed discussion with your insurance broker or agent when obtaining a new policy or renewing your existing policy. Call us now for a comprehensive review of your claim and your policy limits. You do not pay us until we settle your case.
Call Nathan today at 416-289-1236 or visit alliedlegal.ca.
And we want to thank all the folks who make the show possible. These are friends, trusted business associates, and all-around great people. We highly recommend them all. Thank you for your support of Canadian and local sports. A reminder that the show is available on iTunes, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Google Podcast, and Pocket Cast, as well as the Spanglish Network, Buzz TV Live, and Zingo TV. Also, check out the show on YouTube. All of our past great shows are there, clips and shorts. It's great fun. Check it out. Like and subscribe. It is absolutely free. Thank you once again to Ken Reed for being in the program. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Brian Gribben Insurance Planning, helping you solidify your financial future.
At BGIP, what we do that's unique in the marketplace is we show people how to spend and enjoy their money in their early years of retirement without the fear of running out. Also, we're able to do this without you having to change financial advisors. Please look us up at bgip.ca today. Let's book a 30-minute phone call to see how we can bring value to you and your family in your planning.
Call Brian today for all your retirement needs. We did. 905-686-5678.
MNP, a leading Canadian national accounting, tax, and business accounting firm. MNP proudly serves and responds to the need of their clients in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Through partner-led engagements, MNP provides a collaborative, cost-effective approach to do business and personal strategies to help people and organizations to succeed across the country and around the world. With local offices in Oshawa, Mississauga, Burlington, and more, their team is here to support you. Visit mnp.ca today to learn more. Rooted in 60 years of tradition, Sleepy Hollow is a private golf club with a friendly community of members just minutes from Toronto. With mature trees and rolling fairways, Sleepy Hollow provides a challenging and enjoyable experience for passionate golfers. Enjoy great golf, amazing dining, and a picturesque patio second to none. Visit sleepyhollowcountryclub.com. Joe Tilley here. My wife Penny Claire and I recently took an amazing trip to Egypt and Jordan with Trip Oppo. And here are our top 10 must-dos. Another must-do experience is a luxurious cruise down the Nile River. The ship was elegantly furnished with premium facilities, including a spacious lounge and a swimming pool. The cabins were comfortable, well-appointed, offering panoramic views of the Nile River and the surrounding landscape. I would highly recommend that you book your next trip through Trip Oppo. Call them today.
Guests on Joe Tilley Sports receive a gift certificate from Classica Imports. Top of the line imported men's clothing. Check out the Classica Essential Collection now. Go to shopclassica.com.